She mocked the wrong black judge. Then the crooked officer lost her badge, career and everything. You really think you're somebody special, don't you? Officer Patricia Crowley sneered, her hand resting threateningly on her holstered Glock. I don't care what fake legal jargon you spew. Out here on the asphalt, I am the law. You're just another thug in a stolen fancy car. The woman in the driver's seat didn't flinch. Her voice was ice-cold, precise, and completely devoid of fear. You are making a catastrophic mistake, officer. Shut up and put your hands on the wheel, Patricia barked, yanking her handcuffs free. She thought she had nabbed an easy target to stroke her ego, but she had just mocked the wrong black judge, and her entire life was about to be dismantled. The rain was coming down in relentless, blinding sheets across Chicago's Interstate 94. It was past midnight, and the city's usual roar had been drowned out by the rhythmic drumming of the storm. Inside the luxurious cabin of a charcoal-grey Mercedes-Benz S-Class, Kendra Lawson exhaled a long, exhausted breath. She was 38 years old, brilliant, and utterly fatigued. She had just finished a grueling 14-hour day presiding over a complex civil rights docket at the George N. Layton Criminal Court building. Stripped of her heavy black judicial robes, wearing a simple, unassuming grey cashmere sweater and dark slacks, she looked nothing like the formidable Honourable Judge Lawson, who commanded absolute respect in courtroom 302. Tonight, she just looked like a weary woman trying to navigate the treacherous wet roads home. Behind her, the sudden violent burst of red and blue strobe lights shattered the darkness of the highway. Kendra checked her speedometer. She was doing exactly 55 miles per hour, perfectly aligned in the middle lane, her hands at the 10 and 2 position. She hadn't swerved. She hadn't sped. A knot of familiar, weary apprehension tightened in her stomach. She signaled calmly and guided her heavy vehicle onto the slick shoulder of the Dan Ryan Expressway, the gravel crunching beneath her tires as she came to a smooth, controlled stop. She rolled down her window, letting the biting wind and misty rain swirl into the warm, leather-scented interior. She placed both hands visibly on the top of the steering wheel, a survival mechanism ingrained in her long before she ever attended Harvard Law. Heavy, aggressive footsteps splashed through the puddles. A flashlight beam, blindingly bright, was aggressively thrust directly into Kendra's eyes, illuminating her face and the luxurious interior of the vehicle. License, registration, and proof of insurance now, a harsh, raspy voice demanded. Kendra squinted against the glare, her vision swimming with purple spots. Officer, could you please lower the flashlight just a fraction? I can't see. Did I ask for your opinion? Officer Patricia Crowley snapped, leaning in close enough that Kendra could smell stale coffee and peppermint gum. Patricia was a 12-year veteran of the Chicago Police Department, a woman whose career was built on shortcuts, intimidation, and a deeply entrenched bigotry that she barely tried to hide. I said paperwork. Hand it over, or I'm pulling you through this window. Kendra's jaw tightened, but her voice remained perfectly modulated. My registration and insurance are in the glove compartment. My license is in my purse on the passenger seat. I am going to reach for them now. Move slow, Patricia ordered, her hand resting on the butt of her sidearm. As Kendra retrieved her documents, Patricia's flashlight swept over the interior of the Mercedes, lingering on the expensive leather and the high-end dashboard. Whose car is this? Patricia asked, her tone dripping with suspicion. You borrow it from a friend? Or did you just find the keys on the sidewalk? Kendra froze for a fraction of a second. The implication was as loud as a siren. She handed her documents out the window. The vehicle is registered in my name, officer, as you will see on the registration. Patricia snatched the cards. She glanced at the name, Kendra Lawson. It didn't ring a bell. To Patricia, this was just another arrogant civilian who needed to be taught a lesson. You were swerving back there, Lawson, crossing the center line. Smells to me like you might have been drinking. I haven't had a drop of alcohol, Kendra stated clearly, looking the officer dead in the eye. And I maintained my lane perfectly. Your dashcam will verify that. The mention of the dashcam triggered something ugly in Patricia. Her eyes narrowed. Are you telling me how to do my job? Step out of the vehicle. Officer, I am perfectly willing to comply, but I would like to know the legal basis for this order, Kendra said, her legal mind instantly analyzing the situation. Pennsylvania versus Mims gave the officer the right to order her out, but the complete lack of probable cause for the initial stop made this an illegal detention. The basis is that I wear a badge and you don't, Patricia roared, ripping the door handle open. Out, now! Kendra stepped out into the freezing rain. Before she could even find her footing on the slippery asphalt, Patricia grabbed her roughly by the shoulder, spinning her around and slamming her chest first against the wet side of the Mercedes. Hey, what are you doing? Kendra gasped, the cold metal of the car biting through her sweater. Resisting arrest, Patricia grunted, kicking Kendra's feet apart and forcefully yanking her arms behind her back. The cold steel of handcuffs ratcheted tightly around Kendra's wrists, biting painfully into her skin. You people always think you can talk your way out of things. Not tonight. You're going downtown. Kendra Lawson, a sitting judge in Cook County, pressed her cheek against the wet paint of her car, the rain plastering her hair to her face. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. Instead, her mind became a steel trap. She memorized the officer's name tag. Crowley. She memorized the badge number. Number 4892. And she made a silent vow that this crooked cop had just orchestrated her own absolute destruction. The 11th District Precinct at Harrison Street was a chaotic, fluorescent-lit nightmare. It smelled of stale sweat, industrial floor cleaner, and despair. Patricia marched Kendra through the heavy double doors, her grip painfully tight on Kendra's bicep. The precinct was buzzing with the midnight shift's usual arrests: petty thieves, drunk drivers, and people caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. Got a live one here, Patricia announced loudly to the desk sergeant, a heavy-set man named Miller, who barely looked up from his computer screen. Erratic driving, suspected DUI and resisting arrest. Thought she was a smart mouth. Sergeant Miller sighed. Put her in holding cell 3. We'll process her when things quiet down. Patricia shoved Kendra toward the booking area. Empty your pockets. Take off your jewelry. Kendra stood tall, despite the handcuffs still biting into her wrists. I require a telephone call. I have the right to contact my attorney. You'll get a phone call when I say you get a phone call, Patricia sneered, unlocking the cuffs. She violently dumped the contents of Kendra's designer purse onto the metal counter. Lipstick, a wallet, a set of keys, and a thick leather-bound notebook spilled out. Patricia didn't even bother looking inside the wallet. If she had, she would have seen the official State of Illinois judicial identification card tucked neatly behind the driver's license. But Patricia was too busy enjoying the power trip. She swept everything into a clear plastic inventory bag. I am officially invoking my Fifth Amendment right to remain silent and my Sixth Amendment right to counsel, Kendra stated, her voice carrying clearly across the busy room. Several other officers paused, glancing over. The phrasing was too precise, too practiced for the average street arrest. Patricia laughed, a harsh, grating sound. Look at you quoting TV shows. You watch a lot of Law and Order, sweetie? Listen carefully. In this building, I am the judge, jury, and executioner. You sit down and shut up until I decide what to do with you. Kendra was ushered into holding cell 3. It was a concrete box with a single unpadded metal bench and a rusted toilet in the corner. There were 2 other women in the cell, both shivering and looking terrified. Kendra took a seat on the cold metal, wrapping her arms around herself to ward off the chill of her soaked clothes. She sat in silence for 6 hours. During that time, her trained judicial eye observed everything. She watched Patricia Crowley interact with other suspects. She saw the officer casually shove a teenage boy against a wall without provocation. She heard Patricia use racial slurs under her breath while filling out paperwork. She witnessed a toxic culture of impunity that turned her stomach. Kendra had seen the results of bad policing from her bench, reading through motions to suppress evidence and reviewing internal affairs files. But being subjected to it firsthand was a visceral, horrifying experience. Around 4 a.m., Patricia walked past the holding cell, holding a steaming cup of coffee. She stopped, tapping her baton against the iron bars. "Comfortable in there, Princess? You're going to see the magistrate in the morning. Better hope he's in a good mood, because with the report I just wrote up on you, you're looking at a weekend in county." "Are you absolutely certain about the contents of your report, Officer Crowley?" Kendra asked calmly from the shadows of the cell. "I wrote that you were aggressive, belligerent and smelled of alcohol," Patricia smirked. "Who do you think the judge is going to believe? A decorated officer with 12 years on the force, or a hostile suspect throwing a temper tantrum? You're cooked." Kendra didn't reply. She just closed her eyes and leaned back against the concrete wall. She wasn't cooked. The trap was already set. Patricia Crowley had simply locked herself inside it. Dawn broke over Chicago, casting a grey, unforgiving light through the high, barred windows of the precinct. The morning shift was trickling in, bringing the smell of fresh donuts and the loud chatter of rested officers. Patricia sat at her desk, typing furiously with 2 fingers on her keyboard, finalizing her incident reports for the morning docket. "You really going hard on this Lawson woman?" Officer Jenkins, Patricia's younger, nervous partner, asked as he leaned against the partition. "I mean, I reviewed the dashcam footage from the cruiser when I logged it. She wasn't swerving, Patty. And the audio? You didn't even give her a reason for the stop before you yanked her out." Patricia shot him a venomous glare. "Jenkins, are you a cop or a social worker?" She had an attitude. People with attitudes need to be checked. I'm adding failure to obey a lawful order to the sheet. When the judge sees this stack of charges, he'll rubber stamp a heavy bail, and she'll plead out to a misdemeanor just to go home. It's the system, kid. Learn how to play it. Jenkins looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight. "I don't know, Patty. She didn't act like a normal skell. She was too quiet, too observant. Gives me a bad feeling." "Your problem is you have no spine," Patricia scoffed, hitting the print button. The machine whirred, spitting out the fabricated document that would serve as Patricia's sworn testimony. "I've done this 100 times. These entitled people think their money protects them. I'm the great equalizer. Now grab the transport van. We're taking the overnight batch to the Layton courthouse for morning arraignments." At 8 a.m., Kendra Lawson was chained to 4 other inmates, her wrists shackled to a waist chain. She was escorted onto a prisoner transport bus. The bumpy, humiliating ride to the courthouse was something she had sentenced hundreds of men and women to endure. Experiencing the sheer indignity of it. The cold metal seats, the smell of body odor and fear, the jolting stops, solidified a burning resolve in her chest. Upon arriving in the bowels of the George N. Layton Criminal Court building, the inmates were herded into a massive holding pen directly beneath the courtrooms. Above her, Kendra knew, her clerks would be frantically searching for her. She was supposed to be presiding over courtroom 302 in less than an hour. Instead, she was waiting to be called as a criminal defendant in courtroom 101, the primary intake courtroom for misdemeanors and low-level felonies. Patricia Crowley stood near the heavy wooden doors of the courtroom, chatting amiably with the assistant district attorneys who were shuffling through thick stacks of case files. Patricia felt invincible. She was laughing, sipping a latte, completely oblivious to the tectonic plates shifting beneath her feet. "Crowley, you've got the Lawson case, right?" A young ADA, a recent law school graduate named Mark, approached her, looking frazzled. "Yeah, that's me," Patricia smiled tightly. "Slam dunk, resisting, failure to obey, suspected DUI. She'll plead out. Just offer her a fine and probation if she takes it today." Mark frowned, looking at the printed file. "I just got this file 2 minutes ago, but it's weird. There's a flag on it from the Chief Judge's office. They bumped this case to the very top of the docket, and the presiding judge for 101 called in sick an hour ago, so they brought in a substitute from the felony division to handle the morning rush." Patricia shrugged, unbothered. Doesn't matter who the judge is. A badge is a badge. They'll take my word over hers. All right, Mark sighed, adjusting his tie. Let's get this over with. The heavy oak doors of courtroom 101 swung open. The bailiff stepped out. Officer Crowley, bring in your defendant. Courtroom 101 was cavernous, its walls lined with rich, dark mahogany paneling. It was a theatre of justice, designed to make defendants feel small and the law feel omnipotent. The gallery was packed with anxious family members, bored reporters, and off-duty cops waiting to testify. Patricia led Kendra by the arm, guiding her past the wooden swinging gate and directing her to stand at the defendant's table. Kendra was still wearing her damp, wrinkled grey sweater. Her wrists were raw from the cuffs, but as she stood before the bench, her posture shifted. She didn't slouch. She stood with a rigid, undeniable authority, her chin held high, her eyes fixed on the empty leather chair behind the elevated mahogany desk. Patricia stood to Kendra's right, chewing her peppermint gum, looking bored. She didn't even bother to look at the woman she had tormented all night. The side door to the judge's chambers swung open. The bailiff, a burly man named Davis, who had known Kendra for 8 years, stepped forward. He looked down at his docket sheet, then looked at the defendant's table. His eyes widened comically. His jaw physically dropped. He looked at Kendra, then at his sheet, then back at Kendra in utter disbelief. Kendra gave him a microscopic, almost imperceptible nod. Davis cleared his throat, his voice cracking slightly. All rise. The Circuit Court of Cook County is now in session. The Honorable... He paused, swallowing hard. The Honorable Chief Administrative Judge Marcus Harrison presiding. The gallery rose to their feet. Judge Harrison, an older, stern-faced man with silver hair, swept into the room, his black robes billowing. He took his seat, but his eyes instantly locked onto the defendant's table. He froze. A look of sheer bewilderment crossed his face. "Be seated," Harrison murmured, adjusting his glasses to make sure his eyes weren't deceiving him. He leaned forward, speaking into his microphone. "Bailiff, call the first case. Docket number 2026-CR-04882, Davis announced, his voice trembling. State of Illinois versus Kendra Lawson. Charges: resisting arrest, failure to obey a lawful order, reckless driving. Judge Harrison looked from the case file down to Kendra. Counsel for the defense? Kendra stepped up to the microphone. I am representing myself pro se, Your Honor. Patricia rolled her eyes and stepped up to the second microphone. Officer Patricia Crowley, badge 4892, representing the arresting officers, Your Honor. The state is prepared to proceed with arraignment. The defendant was highly aggressive and... Officer Crowley. Judge Harrison interrupted, his voice echoing like thunder through the silent courtroom. Do you have any idea who is standing next to you? Patricia blinked, startled by the judge's aggressive tone. Yes, Your Honor. The defendant, Kendra Lawson. She was driving erratically on I-94 and... Shut your mouth, Judge Harrison ordered, his face flushing red with anger. The entire courtroom went dead silent. You could hear a pin drop. The young ADA, Mark, slowly backed away from the table, sensing an impending explosion. Patricia stood frozen, her mouth slightly ajar. Excuse me, Your Honor? I said close your mouth, officer, Harrison repeated coldly. He looked down at Kendra. Judge Lawson, are you all right? The title echoed off the mahogany walls. Judge Lawson. Patricia felt the air violently knocked out of her lungs. Her stomach plummeted into her shoes. Her vision blurred, and a cold, clammy sweat instantly broke out across her forehead. She slowly, agonizingly, turned her head to look at the woman standing beside her. Kendra Lawson finally looked back at Patricia. The ice in Kendra's eyes was absolute. I am physically fine, Judge Harrison. Kendra spoke smoothly into the microphone. her voice carrying the unmistakable cadence of a seasoned jurist. "However, my constitutional rights and the rights of every citizen this officer is sworn to protect have been egregiously violated over the last 10 hours. "Judge," Patricia whispered, her voice barely a squeak. Her hands began to shake uncontrollably. She looked at the gallery. The other police officers in the back row were staring in open-mouthed horror. "Your Honor," Kendra continued, ignoring Patricia entirely, "I am the presiding judge of courtroom 302 in this very building. I was unlawfully detained without probable cause. I was physically assaulted. I was denied my right to legal counsel. And I have spent the night observing Officer Crowley engage in systematic abuses of power against vulnerable detainees at the 11th District." Patricia's knees buckled slightly. She grabbed the edge of the defendant's table to keep from collapsing. "Your Honor, I didn't know." She didn't say, "Ignorance of the law and ignorance of your victim's identity is not an excuse, Officer Crowley," Kendra said, her voice a lethal weapon. "You told me last night that you are the law, the judge, the jury, and the executioner out on the asphalt. I am here to inform you that you are none of those things." Judge Harrison leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers. He looked at the charging document Patricia had filed, then looked at the shaking officer. "Officer Crowley, you have submitted a sworn affidavit to this court stating that the defendant was driving erratically, smelled of alcohol, and physically resisted your commands," Harrison said softly, the quiet tone far more terrifying than his yelling. "Are you prepared to stand by this sworn document under penalty of perjury?" Patricia opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. She was trapped. If she stood by the report, she was committing perjury against a sitting judge who had the means and knowledge to destroy her. If she recanted, she was admitting to falsifying a police report, a felony that would end her career instantly. I might have been mistaken about the alcohol, Your Honor," Patricia stammered, sweat dripping down her neck. "It was dark and raining." "A remarkable sudden onset of uncertainty, officer," Kendra interjected sharply. She turned to Judge Harrison. "Your Honor, as a sitting judge, I cannot preside over my own case. I officially request that these charges be dismissed with prejudice, as they are entirely fabricated." "So ordered." Judge Harrison struck his gavel. "Case dismissed. However," Kendra continued, not missing a beat, "I am not finished. Under 18 U.S.C. Section 242, the deprivation of rights under color of law is a federal offense. Furthermore, perjury on a police report violates Illinois compiled statutes 720 ILCS 5/32-2. Before court convened this morning, I utilized my one phone call from the holding cell, which I secured only by bribing a janitor, as Officer Crowley denied me my rights, to contact the district attorney and the head of the Internal Affairs Division. Patricia gasped, stumbling backward a step. "At this very moment," Kendra stated, pointing a steady finger directly at Patricia's chest, "investigators are at the 11th District. They have secured the dashboard camera footage from your cruiser. They have secured the body camera footage, which I noted you turned off halfway through the encounter, a violation of department policy, and they are currently auditing every single arrest report you have filed over the last 12 months. "You can't do that," Patricia blurted out in a panic, losing her last shred of composure. "You're just trying to ruin me because you got arrested." "No, Officer Crowley," Kendra replied calmly. "I am trying to ruin you because you are a criminal wearing a badge, and I have the power to ensure you never ruin another innocent person's life again." The doors to the courtroom swung open again. 3 men in sharp suits walked down the center aisle. They bypassed the gallery and approached the well of the court. One of them, a stern-looking man with silver hair, flashed a gold badge to the bench. "Commander Vance, Internal Affairs," the man announced. He looked at Patricia, his expression filled with disgust. "Officer Patricia Crowley, you are to surrender your weapon and your badge immediately. You are under investigation for official misconduct, perjury, and civil rights violations. You are relieved of duty." Patricia's hands went to her belt. Her fingers fumbled numbly as she unclipped her holster, setting her Glock on the table. She unpinned her silver star, her hands trembling so violently the metal clattered against the wood. As she was escorted out of the courtroom by internal affairs, the gallery erupted into murmurs. Patricia looked back over her shoulder, her eyes wide with terror and disbelief. Kendra Lawson didn't watch her leave. She was already turning to the bailiff. "Davis, please tell my clerks I need to shower and change. Courtroom 302 will be in session in 30 minutes. The fallout from the arrest of Judge Kendra Lawson was explosive, dominating the Chicago news cycle for weeks. The media had a field day, crooked cop arrests, chief judge loses everything. But for Patricia Crowley, the headlines were just the beginning of a living nightmare. Internal Affairs didn't just investigate the night of the arrest. They tore Patricia's 12-year career apart, down to the studs. When they reviewed the dashcam footage of Kendra's arrest, it was perfectly clear. The Mercedes had been driving flawlessly. Patricia had initiated the stop out of pure malice. The audio recorded Patricia's unprovoked hostility and Kendra's calm, lawful compliance. It was a textbook case of police harassment. But the rot went much deeper. Once the door was opened, dozens of complaints against Patricia that had been previously swept under the rug by her union reps suddenly saw the light of day. Commander Vance's team discovered a horrifying pattern. Patricia routinely targeted minorities driving expensive vehicles. She had a habit of turning off her body cam during crucial moments. The most damning blow came from her own partner. Officer Jenkins, terrified of going to prison as an accomplice, accepted a sweeping immunity deal from the district attorney. He sat in a small interrogation room and sang like a canary. She called it the asphalt tax, Jenkins admitted to investigators on tape, wiping sweat from his forehead. If she saw a black or Hispanic driver in a Lexus or a Benz, she'd pull them over. If they talked back even a little, she'd hit them with resisting arrest or fake a DUI. She told me the judges always believed her because of the uniform. She thought she was untouchable. When Jenkins' testimony leaked, the police union, which usually fought tooth and nail for its members, quietly and swiftly abandoned Patricia. They released a brief statement condemning her actions and severing all legal support. She was entirely on her own. Within 2 months, the state's attorney launched a massive review of Patricia's past cases. Over 40 convictions were overturned. Innocent people who had taken plea deals just to escape Patricia's fabricated charges were exonerated. The city of Chicago found itself facing millions of dollars in civil rights lawsuits. Patricia sat in her small apartment, watching her life disintegrate on the evening news. She had been fired. Her pension, built over 12 years, was completely revoked under the state's felony forfeiture laws. She had no income, no friends left on the force, and mounting legal bills as she faced a barrage of federal and state indictments. The arrogance that had defined her on Interstate 94 was completely gone. In its place was a hollow, paralyzing fear. She had thought she was preying on a weak, voiceless victim. Instead, she had kicked awake a sleeping dragon who possessed the legal acumen to burn her entire world to the ground. Her defense attorney told her frankly, "Patty, the feds are pushing for maximums. They want to make an example out of you. A bad cop who frames a civilian is terrible. A bad cop who tries to frame a sitting judge, that's political suicide for anyone who tries to defend you. We need to take a plea, or you're going to die in a cage." Patricia refused. Her pride, her last remaining flaw, wouldn't let her admit defeat. She demanded a trial. It would be the final fatal mistake of her life. The federal courthouse in downtown Chicago was a fortress of glass and steel. 9 months after the rainy night on I-94, Patricia Crowley walked into the courtroom, not in her crisp blue uniform, but in a shapeless, drab olive jumpsuit, her wrists handcuffed to a waist chain. Exactly how she had paraded Kendra Lawson. The trial was swift and brutal. The prosecution played the dashcam footage. They played the precinct security footage of Patricia mocking Kendra in the holding cell. Officer Jenkins testified, looking right through his former partner as he detailed her history of corruption and perjury. But the nail in the coffin came on the third day, when the prosecution called their star witness. The Honourable Kendra Lawson walked to the witness stand. She wore a tailored navy suit, her presence commanding absolute silence in the courtroom. She raised her right hand and swore to tell the truth. For 2 hours, Kendra methodically, clinically dismantled Patricia's defence. She didn't speak with anger or vengeance. She spoke with the cold, hard precision of the law. She walked the jury through every constitutional violation, every lie on the police report, and the terrifying reality of what happens when the people sworn to protect the public decide to terrorize them instead. Patricia's defense attorney barely cross-examined her. There was nothing to attack. Kendra's testimony was ironclad, supported by video evidence and a dozen corroborating witnesses. When the jury went back to deliberate, they were gone for less than 4 hours. Patricia stood before the federal judge, her knees shaking so badly the chains around her waist rattled. On the charge of deprivation of rights under color of law, 18 U.S.C. Section 242, we find the defendant, Patricia Crowley, guilty, the foreperson read loudly. On the charge of perjury, guilty. On the charge of falsifying official records, guilty. The judge looked down at Patricia with absolute disdain. Patricia Crowley, you were given a badge and a gun to protect the citizens of this city. Instead, you used your authority to stroke your own ego, to intimidate and to destroy lives. You brought disgrace upon your department and the justice system. I am sentencing you to 84 months in a federal penitentiary with no possibility of early parole. 7 years. Patricia let out a guttural sob, her legs finally giving out as federal marshals grabbed her arms to keep her upright. From the gallery, Kendra Lawson watched without a trace of a smile. There was no joy in this victory. It was a tragedy that it had taken the arrest of a sitting judge to expose a monster who had been preying on ordinary citizens for over a decade. As the marshals dragged the sobbing, broken former officer out of the courtroom, Kendra stood up